Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mormon Stories podcast. We are in the middle of part 3 of our interview with Jeanne and Jason Booth. It is August 14th, 2018, and we have covered 2 major parts of their story, their upbringing in the church in part 1, and in part 2, their service as bishop and bishop's wife. Feminists don't love that term, but that's how Mormons refer to it, but also in the primary presidency, young women's, etc. How in the world does it happen where a sitting Mormon bishop in 2014, 2015 loses his faith, and then what happened with Jeanne as well. And it all had to do with, I would summarize it by saying questioning whether the leaders are truly inspired, and wondering about when callings don't happen, or when history gets revised or changed, starting to wonder whether these men really are called of God, or if they are just sort of like regular people, just making decisions based on their own gut and information. So the last time we left off, Jeanne, you had lost your faith, watching your polygamy and listening to your polygamy podcast and reading about polygamy. And Jason, of course, for you, it was the essays. For both of you, it was Rough Stone Rolling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And all these things that the church has done to try and keep members in the faith end up being the very things that kind of started pushing you guys out. Because the church sold Rough Stone Rolling at Deseret Book, and the church issued these essays. And so I imagine that as bishop, as I think about it, would I rather have an Orthodox bishop in there who's dogmatic and judgmental and shame-based, and he's terrorizing, the children and youth and men and women of the church, like with guilt and shame? I kind of like the idea of a liberal, progressive, even non-believing bishop and bishop's wife, and I'm trying to think about how positive that could be for a ward. And I'm wondering if you kind of, after you guys lost your faith, if you ever just kind of turned to each other and said, well, you know what, there's still a lot of good we can do here, and let's not just hastily rush out and cause a big scene. Why don't we try and make this work as semi-believers or as non-believers?
And that's absolutely what we tried to do. And it's a process over months of struggling and
are we in 2015 by now?
Yes. Yep. So now it's
or not yet?
Nope. Still 2014.
Okay.
Still 2014. So all the essays have been out. Jeanne read Rough Stone Rolling. I got Rough Stone Rolling, started reading it, and for a little while that kind of started to save me again. Where I'm reading through this, and it's a honest, straightforward. Here are lots of the things that happened, and there's a little slant in there. Well, maybe. One of the parts that really was impactful for me when I started to read about Joseph Smith's treasure digging in the Seer Stone, and Richard Bushman makes the point that, look, his family and those times there were kind of supernatural magic things going on, but maybe they needed to be those kind of people so that when Joseph Smith had the first vision or had these miraculous things happen to him, he could come to his family and they would be the kind of people that would believe him and encourage him rather than squash it or any of that sort of thing. And I remember sharing a spiritual thought in a bishopric meeting. We would take turns sharing a spiritual thought every meeting, and it was my turn, and I was reading Rough Stone Rolling, and I mentioned that I was reading it, and my second counselor says, "Oh, my dad read that book," and he said, some people lose their faith when they read that book, but it strengthened my dad's faith. And I'm like, yeah, it's really being good for me. And I shared my spiritual thought on that issue, saying, there are some things that bothered me, but here's a good explanation for why God may have worked it out that way. And for a while, that was helping me kind of have a nuanced view of some of these issues that bothered me. Until I got to...
Let me ask you about this.
Okay, yeah.
Did you have this sort of self-awareness, like, wow, I wonder if there are other bishops like me, and is it weird that I'm reading Rough Stone Rolling, and like... feeling alone? Did you talk to your stake president? Did you find a mentor, a peer? Like that sort of pressure to just keep it to yourself and stay silent. It's so profound.
Yeah, I kept it all to myself. I did feel alone, and monthly we would have bishop, what do they call it? Stake bishop meeting. So it was all the bishops and the stake presidency. We'd meet and talk and we'd discuss things. And I loved those meetings because here are a group of 10 other men in my same situation as dealing with difficult things, and we could just talk about them as normal guys mostly and bounce ideas off each other and things. But what would happen, though, is things would be said in there that would scare me away from bringing up issues I was having, because someone would say something really orthodox or really, I can't think of a great example right off the bat, but they would share an example of somebody in their ward sharing a testimony that wasn't, that I could tell that testimony is from somebody who's struggling with their faith like I am, because they focused on, not worrying so much about prophets, and they just said some things that made the bishop concerned, so the bishop felt his need to get up and we testify about the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, Jesus Christ, and Heavenly Father. That's what a testimony is, not up here sharing your ideas about other things.
And you had lost your faith in those things.
Yes. And so I am completely I 100% see why this guy is, here's somebody who still wants to be in, probably, and is trying to make it work, and he just got, hammered for not sharing the correct testimony. And so that sort of stuff would happen occasionally that just made me kind of keep it to myself. Another small example is, unfortunately, as bishop, sometimes you are involved with disciplinary things. And the stake was having a disciplinary council, and it's usually the high council that takes care of that, but some people were out of town, so they asked me to come, and I went. And this was a reinstatement of somebody, and they're unpleasant. Even when it's a reinstatement, something coming back to the church, I think it's an unpleasant thing, because we're discussing this person's sharing details of their life, very personal, that they're obviously ashamed of, and they're sharing it with a room full of 15 men. And even though it was this person coming back, I didn't like the experience. But at the end, some of the members asked questions, and one of them asked him to share his testimony. And he shares his testimony, and later, when the person is not in the room, someone says, the person who asked about their testimony isn't happy with the testimony because it didn't focus on Joseph Smith enough, and it didn't focus on this enough, and I don't know about this. And I'm thinking, this is not a body of, we're not judging someone's testimony, we're judging their faith in Jesus and repentance. I didn't say any of this. I'm a little ashamed of myself. I didn't send up for this, but it just was another experience where at that time, I'm struggling with my testimony of those things also. I don't have a testimony of those things, and this man is being kind of judged on whether he can be back in the full fellowship of the church with these things, and it all ended up fine. He was accepted with full fellowship back in the church and all that sort of stuff, but experiences like that kept me from sharing how I felt with anybody really besides Jeannie. And
there just really isn't a place for doubt.
Yeah.
There just really isn't for any nuance.
So, so I tried to do the best I could with where I was. It affected my decisions as bishop. I feel like I actually was more compassionate, and when people would confess things to me that I wanted them to forgive themselves, and I that was my focus. Was, hey, you've done what you think you need to do. You've told me. Let's move on from here, and don't worry about this. Don't worry about it. I don't know. It was difficult. It was difficult, and I was.
It's funny you say you think it made you more compassionate, because I feel like that was one of the things that happened for me as well. I was like losing my faith in the church. It helped me be more connected with all people. I really bought into that. I'm kind of special because of my patriarchal blessing. I was, born in this special place, and when I lost all of that, I'm like, no, I'm just lucky to be here where I am, and there's unlucky people who are all around the world. It also helped me not be so judgmental, right? On myself and other people, and more compassionate, for sure.
Yeah. So as I'm continuing to serve, another part. So I wanted to make things better. I wanted to help people who I thought were struggling with things that maybe are putting too much pressure on themselves because of. I started seeing some of the teachings of the church that could be harmful to people. That, and I wanted to ease that as much as I could. But Scout camp time came up again, and I went with the boys to Scout camp. We hiked into White Pine Lake up Logan Canyon by Tony's Grove, and the scoutmaster, who I knew didn't believe anymore, is with us, and he doesn't know that I don't believe either. But great week. We hiked in and camped at this lake and had to bring all of our provisions with us, and so all the boys had little stoves to cook with and their own food, and we're sitting there around the fire, and all the boys are cooking their own meals, and at this point, I have been on 10 of the last 13 week-long scout camps. So I've been to lots of scout camps, lots of boys, spent a lot of time with youth, and I kind of know what 12-year-old boys are like. And, this is no different. This is all the same. And the boys they have these little stoves, and they're cooking boiling water on it to add their meals to it. And I see one boy crouched down over his stove, and right behind him, a boy's lit a stove and has a pot of boiling water right behind him. And I say to the boy, hey, there's a pot of boiling water behind you. Watch out, because I can just see him bumping it and spilling it on him. And his father is there, and his father gets after him and says, that was the bishop that said that, we do what the bishop says. I can tell by the way he's a little anxious about what I said that I may have had some kind of inspired something to know that if he doesn't move, he's going to get boiling water poured on his back or something. And that is added to the gravity of how irresponsible it is for somebody to share an idea and claim divine sanction of that idea and not be right. Because my LDS neighbors and friends are wonderful people who believe, who accept these things as real, and will make sacrifices and change their lives based on what a prophet or an inspired leader says. And most of the time that's okay, and it worked for us. Our life was great. But there are people at the edges innocent people who are impacted by bad ideas that are shared with divine sanction that are affected by these ideas. And if you know you're sharing an idea that's not from God, and you imply that it is, or that struck me, that people are listening, people are treating me different because I'm the bishop. I'm just Jason. I am no different. And
it felt dishonest to you.
It felt dishonest. It felt
misleading.
Like I was a sham. And it felt irresponsible. I had a couple people who turned down a calling because of their life situation. They were not able to do it. And I had a brother come to talk to me about, and he was obviously very upset that he had turned this down and just had some bad experiences with something else related to this calling and just couldn't do it, and was so upset. And I just told him, please don't think that this calling came from the Lord. This is me asking you to do this. And please don't take that upon yourself that you've just turned down a request from Jesus. I just had to get that point across because it breaks my heart. Because that was not a burden I was willing to put on somebody, that to even the risk that they were taking. I don't know if they thought that way or not, but our religious beliefs change our lives, and we have to be careful. And so, it just got to the point where things like that were happening more and more, where I felt like I was doing, I don't know. And then I started reading Rough Stone Rolling a little more. And when I found out that the seer stone that Joseph used to translate the Book of Mormon, he found digging a well for a neighbor when he was 12. And then that was the same stone that he used to look for buried treasure, that crushed my testimony of the Book of Mormon. Because I always, other than my religious beliefs, I didn't have a lot of supernatural beliefs. I was skeptical of lots of, I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in people's supernatural stories. I just didn't believe in them. But my gospel stuff was in its own bubble, and I believed in it 100%. But I didn't believe that you could look in a hat and a stone and find buried treasure, and that there were Indians guarding the treasure, or any of these things. I just did not believe it. And if he used the same method to do that he did to translate the Book of Mormon, either he really did try to find treasure, and there really was treasure, and it really slipped away into the earth when they got close to finding it, or that method is not a reliable way to receive divine inspiration. And so once that dawned on me, or I didn't believe in the Book of Mormon anymore, and at all. And so to me, it was all a product of Joseph Smith, and I'm not sure how everything else came about, but my belief that it was divinely inspired was gone, and then that was it. I didn't believe in the church at all anymore. I didn't believe in Joseph at all, and pretty soon I had doubts about the divine, and I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like a phony. I couldn't. It just got really heavy. And I remember, as I'm struggling with this, one of my days off, I had gone to Home Depot for some home project, and nobody else was home. Everyone's at school or work, and I'm just feeling the weight of all of this, and driving home, and I'm just crying in my car because I don't know what to do. I'm just crushed, and I don't know what to do. I'm crying. I think I need to go see my mom and talk to her about this, and she was out of town, and I drove home to my house, and I went into my room, closed the door, no one was home, and I knelt down, and I just poured out my heart and offered up what I felt like was the most sincere, desperate prayer of my life. And I just laid it out there, and I pleaded for what to do, and I prayed about the things you're supposed to pray about. Is the Book of Mormon really true? Was Joseph Smith a prophet? Is the church your church? And I just knelt there and cried, and nothing's coming. And pretty soon I'm pleading with God to tell me if He's there. After what seemed like forever, nothing came. And it broke my heart. I just, if there is a God, I have to feel that he knew what was on the line with that prayer. And he knew what that meant to me, that if I didn't get something, and I wasn't asking for anything big, some peace, something would have done it. I think he had to have known that what this would mean for my family, that I could no longer be the bishop. I could no longer do this, and that this was going to impact my life, my wife's life, my kids' life. And after a while, I stood up.
Wait, did you pray with real faith?
If I
Real
didn't,
intent?
if I didn't,
Was it a sincere heart?
Obviously not.
if I didn't,
Sincere?
yeah, if it wasn't,
really wanna
that
know?
was my best effort ever. And if it wasn't, I don't know what is. And when I got up, I knew I was done. My tears stopped, and I actually, once I looked in the mirror and I thought, I'm done. And at that moment, I had peace. I had made a decision, and I felt it was going to be okay. Just like when I went to pray before my mission, and I was struggling about that girl, and I had that peace. Oh, it's going to be okay. I had it then, the same. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that was just, I made a decision, and my body's like, all right.
Let's do it.
Or maybe
Yeah.
God's okay with me bailing as bishop. I don't know. But shortly after that,
What year and month was that?
so this is probably October, November of 2014. Oh, and I left out an important part. That general conference, another issue that really bothered me. And this is,
Were you aware of the Kate Kelly excommunication that would have happened that summer?
yes, I was. And yours, right? Did you?
I
About
was
a year.
I was threatened with excommunication,
Okay.
but it wasn't until early 2015. Were you paying attention to that?
I was. I remember discussing it at work I worked with some really great men who are all faithful, and we would talk about church things a little bit. They knew I was a little more liberal and progressive than they were. And excuse me, we talked about the Kate Kelly issue, and I remember saying, because they said, well, she just needs to do, she knows what she's supposed to do, and I'm like, why can't the prophet ask? Has he asked if women can have the priesthood? Like, what's the harm in her asking?
Or even say, we asked and it's in.
Yeah, like even a response of some sort. And they all, oh, I'm sure there was a response. And I'm like, have you ever tried to write a letter to the first presidency or prophets? Because they go to your stake president. There's not a way to petition the leaders of the church for an answer. Anyway, yeah, we talked about that a little bit, and that did bother me when she was excommunicated.
So the conference talk,
Yeah.
fall 2014.
Yep. Elder Nelson talked about about Revelation, and he talks about I can't remember the name of the talk, but he's talking about how great it is that we have these 15 men from different backgrounds and from different life experiences who receive revelation and discuss things, and then when unanimity is reached, they know it's the will of God. Because can you imagine how much the Spirit has to work on these men to get them to all agree on the same thing? And then you know it's revelation. And when I heard that and then read it again in the conference talk, I thought, that is not the revelation I learned about my whole life in the scriptures. God tells the prophet, and then he tells us. And it doesn't matter if I don't agree with what God just told the prophet. It doesn't matter. If God wants us to, if it's God, that's that. I can take it up with him, I guess, but that sounded more like a committee meeting to me than any kind of a revelation process. And that cemented to me that at the very top, it's the same as my bishopric, that we are just guys trying to do our best, trying to do good, praying about it, and whoever the bishop or stake president or whoever is makes a decision, and everyone supports them, and that's that. And at the top, it's the same. And from then on, it wasn't a church. It was just a corporation to me, and I knew my faith was gone. I had that. Then afterwards, I had that prayer, and then in November, I couldn't make a tithing check. I could not do it. My faith was gone. And that when I couldn't pay it, I knew, okay, that means you can't have a temporal commend, and you can't be the bishop and not have a temporal commend. I knew I was done. So I wrote an email to my stake president, and
Did you talk to Jeannie first?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right, Jeannie.
Yeah.
What was
And
that like?
I was scared to do that, to have you step down. I was worried about what people would think and say.
How did he tell you?
Well, I remember were discussing it, and no decision was really made until that night in December. You just came in and said, "I can't do it," and I wrote the letter, and I'm going to send it. And I was like, okay. And
you were kind of prepared by that point.
I was, and like I said, my testimony fell pretty hard, pretty quickly. It really did. Although I would go back and forth on wanting to make it work, but I was pretty shaken by some of the things I had read that weren't, what I thought it was, and so I totally supported him in that and knew that he would feel better.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what that would mean for our future.
Had you had anyone to talk to during this whole thing? No. Sister, someone in the ward, a friend?
I remember confiding with my little sister a little bit about the polygamy stuff, and could tell that it really made her uncomfortable. And so I stopped. Not parents.
Isn't it amazing
not friends.
that in a church, this isn't to pick on the church, it's just, I can't describe it as anything other than kind of unbelievable, that in a church that's so focused on family, when you're going through the hardest part of your life, the most traumatic, the most difficult things, you don't feel comfortable talking to your own parents and siblings about what you're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I get it though, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you say it, they're worried about your soul.
Yeah,
And
you don't want to worry.
But it should be family before, in my ideal world, it's family before belief, right?
I only felt that way when I was no longer a believer.
Yeah. Until then, it's belief before family.
Well, yeah, because
that's what's going to keep you together as a family
that's right.
forever.
Yeah.
So did you feel lonely?
Oh, yeah. Very alone. Yeah. And it seriously is an identity crisis as well as a faith crisis. I didn't know what that meant for me or who I was. And it was a frightening thing.
We were lucky that we were able to talk to each other.
We're lucky we have each other because we know others who differ on.
And one thing that I never doubted was that Jeannie would love me. Our relationship was just rock solid.
Yeah.
For our whole life, and so we worked through it together, and luckily
we feel
we
really
felt
lucky.
similar. I don't know. I think if I had shared initially with Jeannie and it had gone very poorly, I might not have allowed myself to pursue looking into it. I might have just thought, all right, it's true, I'll be the bishop, and because Jeannie was more important to me than anything else.
And this underscores something that I've gotten feedback from listeners about. So far, we've tended to interview couples that, just because it's hard to get mixed faith couples where the believer is still a believer to come on. So I want to make an open invitation. If there are any listeners out there who are in a mixed faith marriage where one of the members of the couple still believes, we really want to have you on and talk about that. But what I hear from others is, there are these happy endings in terms of the marriage where the couple ends up on the same page, and either they stay in the church of as non-believers or semi-believers, or they leave together as non-believers. But either way, the marriage emerges intact and kind of victorious. Those are the happy endings.
Right.
But in so many instances, the spouse, the husband and the wife, are on different pages, and that can wreak havoc in the lives of those involved. Severe depression, severe anxiety, severe distress on the marriage, sometimes divorce, sometimes estrangement, sometimes parental estrangement, and it's devastating. And it's you guys frankly were just lucky. You were lucky you were on the same page.
Yeah.
And bless you both for being willing to do that. But my heart goes out, for those of you who are listening, where things didn't turn out. It's not your fault. You were victims. And my heart goes out to you that you're sitting here watching this success story of unity when in your world that wasn't possible. And we just want to say, and I'm guessing that there are many bishops that just in your situation just bite the bullet and keep serving as bishop.
Right.
Because the consequences are too devastating to contemplate.
Yep.
And what would that have been like for you to just keep serving as bishop, to just suck it up and keep serving?
I don't know. I don't know if I would have let myself get to a point where I didn't.
You would have kept up. You wouldn't have allowed yourself to go there.
I don't think so. I think
it was
I would have.
The safety of your relationship, your security in your relationship with Jeannie, that allowed you to question.
Yep.
Whereas if you had not felt secure in her love, you wouldn't have allowed yourself to just be honest with yourself.
So. I think I would have. The first argument that I read that fixed the problems I had, I would have just held on to that and
this is how faith is so often
out.
Preserved, is the consequences of openness and honesty and objectivity are just too severe. And so we do this confirmation bias thing where you just gather the evidence that bolsters your current situation and you ignore or downplay the evidence that would take you in any other direction because the costs are just too high.
Right. And I think that's exactly, I feel fortunate that my life is I'm in a good enough position that I could think about it that way. And I don't fault anyone who doesn't have the same circumstances and makes a different decision or goes a different direction. That's just how we are as humans. I think I imagine there are multiple aspects of my life right now where I ignore something that might be true because it might
we all have
my life.
Sure.
So I don't know what they are, but I imagine that they're there.
You may not want to know.
That's right. So,
Okay. So you write the letter.
Yep.
What'd the letter say? Basically, was it detailed? Was it brief?
Actually, I have it.
Oh, you do?
I do have my email.
Do you want to read it?
Sure.
Okay, that's
not
fine.
very
This was just Yep. I just said, I hope you're doing well. I need to meet with you at your earliest convenience. I know the burden of your calling must be heavy, and I'm sorry that I may add to it. I'm struggling with my own testimony, and I don't feel I can continue to serve as the bishop of the Fremont Ward. I realize the difficulty of this situation, and especially the stress this may cause the members of my ward. I care about my friends, neighbors, and ward members, and have not come to this decision lightly. I have laid awake many nights trying to decide what to do. Even now, I'm unsure. I have prayed and studied for months to try and resolve the issues I have, but I feel farther away from believing that the church and the restoration are what I've been teaching for most of my life. I've had doubts for several years, and the death of my father also changed me. I have continued to live the standards of the gospel and to serve in the church. When I was called to serve as the second counselor of the bishopric, I used the message President Hinckley's father gave him as a new unsure missionary: forget yourself and go to work. That mantra helped me to again put my doubts away and take care of the work at hand, but it's different as bishop. I don't have the faith to ask a member with financial problems to pay tithing. I don't have anything but empathy to offer to a member who comes to see me about their own doubts, and I'm unable to testify about the restoration and modern prophets. And that was it. And about I don't remember if it was that night or the next morning. It was late at night, I think, when I sent it. And the next morning, the executive secretary called me and asked if I could see the stake president the next morning. And I said, sure. And
He's a CES.
he's a seminary teacher, and a
Wonderful
wonderful,
guy.
wonderful person. Like, just loving, thoughtful, kind.
And didn't want you to leave. It was
No,
like,
no,
well, let's meet.
Yeah, so I went and I just told him basically everything I just said here, and he was excellent. He was empathetic and listened. He didn't try to fix anything for a little while. That first meeting, he just listened, heard me out, and wanted to talk for a little while. And so we started making kind of appointments for a little while. I told him, look, I know this is not a quick process for you to choose a bishop. I know it's difficult and you have to get approval and everything. And he was a new stake president. He had only been in for, I guess it might have been a year at that time. But so we met pretty frequently, and he tried to resolve some of my concerns. But it just, at that point I was done. Early on, he talked about, well, you mentioned polygamy as an issue, so when he opened the Old Testament, and I just said, let me stop you right there. The Old Testament is top of my list for things that are wrong with the scriptures, and in my view, polygamy puts men above women, and that's not okay with me. And if God, I just don't think God would do that. And then he closed his scriptures, and we talked more about. That was kind of it for resolving concerns and things. And so he was kind of hoping I would have an Alma the Younger experience. He was asking me to pray and read and telling me to be careful of sources. And I'm like, I have only read things from the church and the scriptures, and I guess rough stone rolling, but
Richard
I
Bushman
can't,
was
yeah.
faithful. Yeah.
And I didn't have an Alma the Younger experience, and so at one point he realized, well, I'm not. I can't remember how it came up, but I wasn't doing all my duties as bishop, as far as, like, I wasn't paying tithing. I wasn't believing in the priesthood. I didn't have faith in the priest anymore. So he realized this is not
ideal.
We need to change. We need to make a change. And then he kind of asked me who in the Word I thought would be a good bishop, and I said, well, and I told him, and ta-da.
The person you recommended became bishop?
I knew it would be. That's who I thought should be the bishop before I was. Mm-hmm. I thought he was the logical choice. But, and it's the same thing. My stake president was newer, didn't know a lot of members of my ward except for the high councilman from my ward serving in the high council, and who was also an outstanding guy, and he's the new bishop. So he got called, and so this is now
Spring.
March.
Yeah.
And about 3 weeks before the date, my scoutmaster friend's wife makes an appointment to come talk to me, and they come in to see me, and they come in together, and she starts telling me about, my husband's kind of lost his faith, and then she starts going into issues she's having, and Book of Abraham, and this, and and they stop, and then they're looking at me like waiting for some kind of a response, and I'm like, well, let me tell you something. I said, I agree with everything you just said, and in 2 weeks, I'm going to be no longer the bishop.
Whoa.
They were floored, and I'm like, please don't mention it to anybody, but she had asked to be released from her calling, and she was actually Jeannie's primary teaching partner, right?
We weren't partners,
they weren't
but we
partners.
were both in
They're both in primary. And Jeannie had told me also, I can't teach.
Well, I was just trying to teach these lessons, and I was in tears. Ridiculous things like the flood that I always believed was literal, absolutely literal. And now I'm like rethinking everything, and I couldn't teach it anymore without crying. And yeah. So I was like, I just need a little break to figure this out.
So I had the primary president in, and I said, there's a couple sisters in our ward that we need to release from their primary callings. It's the sister and Jeannie. and she's looking at me like, and I said, because they're struggling with their faith. And I said, it's this and Jeannie. And she kept together really well, but I could tell it shocked her. And then 2 weeks later, it was time, the stake president told me they had a new bishop and everything was set up. And we met before the meeting. I told my counselors, and I told the Ruth City president and a few other people, just gave them a heads up because I didn't want it to, I don't know, surprise them. And so that went okay. They were all wonderful, understanding people, and I could tell some were quite sad about it and upset, but you know, this was what it was. And so the day came, and I conducted the meeting, and I could, you know, lots of people are there, and the new bishop's family is there, and people are noticing all the stake presidencies on the stand, and you know, something's going on. And
it's not 5 years, right?
No, it's 1.5 after I was bishop. So
1.5.
Yeah. So I was.
Yeah.
So you're wondering, they must think there's adultery, or they must think there's some.
That's what we were concerned.
I thought they're going to blame me.
So
they let me talk too.
Yeah, the
just
stake president beforehand talked to both of us and said, "Would you like to speak?" And I wanted to, and Jeannie.
I did too, because otherwise it would be,
it's the wife.
I know, I knew.
Even though
Jeannie.
Our ward members are wonderful.
Right.
Wonderful people.
I don't want to throw them under the bus. I just knew how I was. Maybe I was just an awful Mormon.
So we went through all the beginning stuff, the announcements and the sacrament and everything, and then after sacrament, stake president got up and said, "We're making changes," and he got a little emotional. When it came time to release me, and people were shocked, I could tell, and then we spoke, each of my counselors and I and Jeannie, and then the new bishop and counselors and the stake presidency all spoke kind of short, and I just focused on, I just kind of emphasized that this was something I needed to do for my family, that I had really put a lot of thought into this, and that it's something I need to do for my family. And then I said, I'm not worried about how this looks, because if there are a group of people who should be able to handle difficult things in life, it's followers of the Savior. And difficult things happen in the church. We have deaths in families. We have missionaries come home early and we don't know what to say. And we have these things. But if we love people and just show up, everything will be okay. And I just tried to focus on that, and I thought it went really well, and I felt really good. When I sat down after I was done speaking, I had that peaceful, I just felt great.
Good feeling.
And, that's, and then Jeannie,
I focused on,
or maybe you were
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, just about how much we love the people, and that we love the people, and it's, I couldn't bear my testimony in a traditional fashion either, and so I think people walked away wondering if it wasn't doubt. I said a lot of, I hope there's, a God, or I believe there is, and I believe in the Savior. It wasn't the I know, which I had always known.
Yeah. In an ideal world, you'd be able to just be 100% honest, because the reality is you both lost your testimonies.
Yeah.
But you didn't feel like you could say that.
No. And it's a complicated thing, though, right?
Of course. Of course it's complicated.
I didn't want to harm other people's testimony. I don't know.
But then you have to put it on the family, and it's going to make people think, well, does someone have
Well, what's
cancer?
going on?
Does someone have a porn problem? Is there an
Yeah.
infidelity? So by feeling forced to be
Right.
intentionally vague, you leave yourselves open to the rumor mill and guessing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that actually happened. So
Yeah.
I did have skin cancer on my arm at the time, and I had had surgery to have it removed. And I had told the Relief Study president already. Then I told her I had doubts, and that was some of the issues why I was leaving. And she happened to be at the gym with a lady whose husband got called into the bishopric. So they were talking. This is before they got called, and she said, "Oh, so-and-so has to go meet with the state president." And my releaser president knew, oh, that means he's probably going to be in the new thing, and didn't say anything. And then she came back, and she said something to her like, "How was your visit with the state president?" And she's like, "Did you know Bishop Booth has cancer?" And so the reason I know this, I get a text from my releaser president that says, "I just heard something that's making me very concerned for your family. What aren't you telling me?" And so I called her and said, what are you talking about? And she said, "I heard you have cancer." And I said, "Well, I do, but it's not the bad kind. It's just something they cut off my arm." But what turns out my daughter had mentioned this to a friend, and that friend had mentioned it to the mother of the person getting called. And so
And she assumed
I was stepping down because I had cancer, and I didn't want that rumor to spread, so I called her back and said, "Please tell her that's not why. That's not the issue." So, yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
Okay.
it would be nice to be more.
So how did the members of the ward respond? And how did your bishop and stake president respond in the days and weeks and months after stepping down?
Initially, right after Simon, was excellent.
Yeah, hugs and tears, and people were so...
People tell us they support us and love
Yeah.
us, and I got text messages, and it was really great.
It did feel a little... I wanted people to know, because I was afraid of rumors. And so, like in the lobby, when I was hugging people, I told several people, we just don't believe the way we used to. I wanted people to know that there was a reason why it wasn't just that we wanted out of our calling or whatever.
So you did tell people.
I did, not over the pulpit, but in the lobby. And I was like, because, yeah, there was questioning on everyone's faces, right? And
Yeah. So that went well, and we were still intending on attending church and going. And we had talked to our children before, a couple weeks before, and told them, we just had kind of a family council and said, we are struggling with our testimonies, and we've learned some things that make us think the church is not what I thought it was, and I'm not going to be the bishop anymore. And it was difficult for some of our kids. There were tears and like, well, just because you found out something about this doesn't mean the church isn't true. And I said, I agree. It does not mean that. And I just tried to be open about how I felt. And I said, but I can't be the bishop anymore. And one of my daughters was really upset, worried about what people were going to think of me. So that was really difficult. But then they all were there, and we attended on always attending, and we kept coming to church. And then I started meeting with the new bishop about every week. And he's tried to resolve some of my concerns. Well, at first when a bishop transitions to a new bishop, right, you meet and discuss what's going on in the ward to help him know who you're working with and all sorts of stuff. And so we did that, and we met for hours. And at the end, I said, well, now we'll get to the booths. And so we kind of just went down to everybody, and then I just explained all of this. And he had never heard of the essays or any of this, nothing. And initially, I brought up the different accounts of the first vision as being something that really bothered me. And he initially was like, where did you read that? Like, and I said, well, on LDS.org. All the accounts are there, and
This is 2015 now.
yes,
We've still got a bishop that has never heard of the
yeah,
essays.
and he's only
or
been a
any-
bishop for about an hour and a half. Well,
still,
maybe
like-
6. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And yeah.
But as a member, he hadn't heard.
No. Very few people I talked to had heard about them at all. And before this, you want to tell them about our conversation with your mom, how that came about? How she called and
Upset,
well, no,
right?
she was telling you how happy she was that I was bishop. And
Oh, didn't we say that?
did we say that already? I don't remember now. Maybe.
No, that was
I don't think
before.
so. I
Was
don't
it?
think-
Yeah.
Yeah, right before.
This is like a week before I'm going to be released.
She's, just her heart is full. She's so glad that we're doing so great, and I felt like I had to tell her that you were going to be released and that we were questioning, and that was tough, and it upset her a lot. Right?
Yeah.
We went to her house to talk to her and her husband and after talking, she understood that we're still us, and I think she felt better.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It would go up and down, right? She kind of felt okay about it, and then later would get thinking about things, and right, what does that mean? That means our family might not be eternal. All sorts of stuff, and
The kids and
yeah.
So it's still hard.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So much of people's commitment to the church is tied to their parents and not wanting to disappoint their parents.
Right.
And how devastating that is to have a mom or a dad just look at you and say, how could you fall away? How could that happen?
Right.
And I think they take it as their fault. Teach your children the way they should go, and
They will not fall.
right, and it's not her fault.
It's not your mom's fault.
No.
No.
How about your dad? By passing away, some might say, well, you got offended, or you didn't believe enough in the plan of salvation, and so your dad's passing caused you to doubt, and you weren't strong enough.
That could be true. That could be true. I don't know what else I could have done when the information is presented to me. Like along the way, I tried to. I can't remember who gave the talk about choosing to believe. And Elder Uchtdorf had given the talk about doubting your doubts, and these helped me a little bit along the way. But I couldn't change the way I felt, and I just did not believe anymore. And I couldn't make myself believe. And I look at it like my friends and family don't go to Catholic church because they don't believe in it. They go to the Mormon church because that's what they believe. I can't make myself go to Catholic church. I can't make myself be anything else. I can't make myself believe in this anymore. And
What if they say pray and read the scriptures more? You didn't pray and read the scriptures enough.
I feel confident in my level of effort, and if I die and I meet whatever is up there, if I meet God and He says, "Hey, what's up with you leaving this bishop?" I'm going to say, "Hey, do you remember December 2014? What was up with that? Why didn't you do anything?" I feel completely confident in my level of effort that I.
What about that scripture that says it's a weak and perverse generation that seeketh a sign?
Yeah, that's me, I guess. I don't know.
But there's so many that say, "Ask and you shall receive."
Oh yeah,
right?
Knock and it shall be opened. It's just the scriptures are full. And one of the things that happened to me after my father passed away, one of the things that affected me so much was I could no longer listen to somebody's story about a family member or somebody they know who was sick and gravely ill, and they all prayed and they got a priesthood blessing and they were better. Because my experience was, hey, there's probably someone in the next room to your relative, and they're praying just like you, and they're faithful just like you, and they believe in the priesthood just like you, and their family member's going to die. And it's not their fault. It's just the way it works. And across town, across the country, there is a Methodist family who has just as much faith as you do, and their family member is healed, and their Methodist neighbor is going to die. All of a sudden, those stories meant nothing to me because it wasn't my experience. And I didn't know what else I could. Presented with what I had, I didn't know what else to do besides what I did and how I felt. Yeah.
So, in the church, the most dangerous thing by far is an apostate, is a heretic. More dangerous than anything else, more dangerous than an anti-Mormon or non-Mormon or sin or, law of chastity violation, because you once believed and then you studied and decided it wasn't true. Multiply that times 1,000 because you were a bishop and a bishop's wife. So what's it like? What's it like to continue in a ward where you had both openly professed non-belief, and then you're like still attending and still amongst the saints? I imagine that's going to be causing cognitive dissonance for you, but more importantly for the members, because it's like, why are these people here? They're making us uncomfortable. We know they don't really believe. How does that play out?
So pretty quickly, my son was turning 16 in March to be ordained a priest. And I've been meeting with a new bishop. And we didn't actually get very far as active members of the ward because we told our kids we will go as long as you want to go. And my son wanted to be ordained a priest. And my son was struggling with all of this too. He's trying to work out where he is, what he believes, and is struggling and having a really hard time. And at one point, I'm meeting with the bishop, and then my son is going to talk with the bishop after me. And I talked to the bishop about, hey, I know my son's going to be ordained here soon. I would like to still do it. And he had some serious concerns about that. Because he asked me, do you believe in the priesthood? And I said, I don't. But then I said, there was a conference talk not too long ago that talked about the important things in a blessing. And the most important thing in a blessing given by a priesthood holder was the faith of the person receiving the blessing. And I tried to reference that, but I think he was thinking of a different conference talk about, I can't remember which one he was thinking of, but he did not think it was okay for me to ordain my son. And then I said, well, he said he would talk to the stake president, and then I finished my meeting with him. I went out, and then my son came in, and he asked for a blessing, and I had to tell him, and he wanted me to give it to him, and I said I can't, and he was really upset by that, and so the bishop and somebody else.
I can't meaning you don't want to, you don't believe it, you're not worthy?
The bishop did not.
I can't meaning the bishop won't let me.
Yes. And I get it, right? He's a new bishop, and I did things like this as a bishop. I took my responsibility serious, that when somebody messed up, didn't say the words correct in a blessing, right? I had to have them fix it because I worried that it's got to be done correctly because I believed it was true. And so I understand where he's coming from, that this guy doesn't even believe in this and he wants to give a blessing, and that's, there's all sorts of reasons why that shouldn't happen. But I had to tell Jack, I can't. And I told the bishop, I said, will you please? So he went to get another counselor to do that. And I asked the bishop, I said, look, this is going to look bad, that he's going to come in here to give a blessing to my son, and I can't. And I said, he doesn't know what's going on, the counselor. Will you tell him that it's because I don't believe, not because I've committed some kind of a sin? And he said he would. And so I was worried how it would look. And then I explained it to my son, and the bishop and the counselor gave him a blessing. And then he talked to the bishop for a little while. Then we drove away from the church, and we just drove away, not home. We went to a park and got out of the car and he was upset and crying, and I put my arm around him, and I just told him I loved him. I know this is hard. And he kept meeting with the bishop to try and kind of sort these things out, but he started to look into things for himself and kind of, we found this out later. At one point he asked the bishop if Joseph Smith really said the earth was 7,000 years old, and the bishop gave an answer that kind of discounted science a little bit, and my son was done. He was like, pfft. That was it. He was done. And so my other kids, our younger two, just kind of said, we'll do what you guys do, and didn't really want to attend. And our daughter attended for a while, and we went with her, and it kind of faded away. And a couple months after being released, we were done going to church. I found out how wonderful Sundays were. I mean, all of a sudden I had a day that was 10 hours of church. Now I could do whatever I wanted. It was
pretty amazing.
Incredible. So
has there ever been a point where your bishop, stake president, members of the ward viewed you as a threat and treated you like a threat? Came after you?
Not really. Not that I know of. Everyone...
They don't know what to do with us. I mean, it's awkward.
Yeah. And the new bishop, when I talked to him, and I told him exactly where we were, and he kind of said, look, I think you guys just need some space. And
maybe he was protecting.
I don't know. But we did. We kind of did need space. Because I really didn't want to talk about this as far as sharing the things that bothered me with anybody. I was afraid that they would come to the same conclusion as me and they would be out. And I didn't want to do that. So, yeah. So we were kind of left alone. I mean,
no, you've never been treated like a threat or a problem.
No,
Nope.
People are so...
No, I think we're fortunate. We have lived in this same area and ward for 16 years now, and we know people really well, and most of our neighbors have been pretty good and treat us the same as ever. It's really commendable for how well people have treated us. We have had some awkward, weird things, definitely, but it's been pretty good.
Did you have members knock on your door and say, tell us everything we want to know?
No, but we did. Like, I called the gal who was released at the same time, and I'm like, someone to talk to who knew the issues. And then we did get a call from can we say their names?
Maybe not, unless you have their permission.
Yeah, I think we do, but...
Oh, okay.
They had moved from the ward,
Yeah.
and she heard about...
Well, he was my
stepping
executive
down.
secretary
Oh, yes, that's right.
while I was a bishop.
And you have permission to say their names.
Yeah.
So who is it?
Yeah, well, you asked him.
Yeah. It's Markham and April Carroll.
That's not the scoutmaster, though.
Nope.
That's different.
Yeah.
So we have
permission to say their names? Okay, who's that?
JJ and Melissa Acker. We talked to them too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
we did have kind of...
he reached out to us because his wife was going through the same sort of thing, kind of parallel to us, but about 6 months behind. And he was still believing. And this is about 6 months after I was not bishop anymore. We ran into him at Walmart, and I had a beard, and they had kind of heard about it. And he called later and said, I'm just going to say this. I don't know what happened, but my wife's struggling with some things, and we went over and talked to them, and just became really close because we knew what they were going through, and we right up front though I tried to say, hey, I don't want to influence where this leads. I mean, look at us, we're out, and I don't want to.
Yeah,
it's really hard, and I wouldn't wish this on anybody.
No.
So I'm torn, right? I want to tell people what happened, but...
And you want everyone to know.
But it was so... that year, that's all I thought about was... what does this mean? I felt lost and crushed and heartbroken, and I don't know. I'm torn still about how to deal with this.
Yeah.
Were you surprised at how few members of the ward came up and asked you what happened or wanted to talk about it?
Yeah, nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, one of our friends did want to talk about it, but I didn't want to. And I just said that my story is not faith promoting, and it's hard because I know how precious the gospel is to you, because it's precious. It was precious to me, and I regret a little bit not talking to them, because they were really close friends, and now through no fault of them or us, we're not. I mean, we're friends, but it's not.
But it's not like it was.
It's so my older brother, who didn't believe from a child up, right? We were always got along great, but that was always something between us that prevented us from being close. And now, when he found out, he called me immediately, and we just talked and talked and talked. And now our relationship is completely different. Like, but it feels like I took that little barrier between he and I put it between now my believing family and friends. It's just a weird thing. And so I regret a little bit not being more open about it, but I don't know how I feel about it.
So what was your justification for doing this interview, given all the complexities of like not wanting to hurt people's faith, not wanting to take people's faith away from them, why do it?
For me, so I've had a couple of instances now where I've been out longer, and my lifestyle has changed a little bit. And
meaning what? Beer?
I occasionally drink a beer. I like coffee. I recently went on a work trip with somebody who knew I was a bishop, but didn't know I left the church, and kind of knew I drank coffee. And I had a beer in front of them, and it was very uncomfortable and very difficult. But once we talked about it, it was all okay. Once I addressed, look, this is who I am, and this is where it is. And he told me, and he shared experience with me, and it was great. Once we talked about it, then it was okay. That barrier was kind of gone. And my hope is that we can present, this is us. We're the Booths, and we don't go to church anymore, and we don't believe. And maybe address that issue. I don't know. I think it's more healthy to be real, and
and be authentic.
It
feels good to be authentic and to just not be hiding anything.
Yep.
I hope it helps other people going through the same thing. Like we were helped by your podcasts.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're kind of paying it forward?
Hope so.
Or paying it back. Listening to other people's stories helped me a lot. Made me feel not alone and not strange and not broken. And so if anybody can listen to this and feel a little better, then that's good.
Are you worried about your mom at all? Or other family members?
A little bit. Yeah, I am, but I want them to know where we're coming from. I think this is just our truth. This is what happened to us, and what we went through. And I think my family will see that and see that we are us, that we've always been. And
Well, and if somebody says, well, okay, go through your thing, but just kind of, you don't have to talk about it to spoil it for other people. Just kind of keep it to yourselves for the good of the community, for the good of other people's faith. What would you say to that, Jeannie? Especially given that you had served as the bishop and bishop's wife.
Right. I think you don't have to listen to this interview. They can turn it off. We're not out there knocking on people's doors or telling our family or their kids, our experience. But if it can help somebody, if someone's going through some of the same things we did, I want to be there for them. Yeah. And I think everyone should be able to be authentic and to say their truth and what happened and how they feel.
Yeah. Let them worship how, where, and what they may.
What?
That's right.
What? Don't be quoting the Articles of Faith now.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Well, this concludes part 3 of our interview with Jeanne and Jason Booth. I do want to have one more segment. I don't know how long it'll be, but I don't want to just leave it where they lost their faith and left the church. I think one of the most important things we do with Mormon Stories, with the Open Stories Foundation, is help people rebuild a life post-Orthodoxy, whether in or out of the church, help them know that there can be joy and meaning and fulfillment after. So if it's all right, we'll spend a little bit more time in part 4 talking about where you are now and whether you have become dark and loathsome, at least spiritually, and but just in all seriousness, just kind of if you've been able to find joy and health after leaving. Is that all right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. So thanks for joining us for part 3 of this episode, and we'll see you soon for a final segment on how Jeanne and Jason Booth are doing after leaving the church. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Come right back.